Hello, Ralph. Hello, Joe. How are you two today?
Almost as good as you, Yvonne.
Ralph?
Doing great, Yvonne. How about you? How's it going over there?
Doing great. I'm sitting here in Panama where it's warm and toasty today. And I know that you're in Panama where it's warmed up a little bit since last week.
Not in Panama. I'm in Tampa, but yes, it has
Did I
warmed
say
up
Panama?
quite a bit.
What I said Tampa. Joe, where are you joining us from?
The shoreline of Connecticut. Down here to be grandpa to our 5-week-old grandson because his parents need some sleep. So I volunteered to come down for a couple days.
Well, awesome. And congratulations on being grandpa x2.
Thank you. I was only tangentially involved, but I'll take all credit if it turns out he's a
That's awesome, Joe.
That's awesome. Well, I know you're having a great time. So thank you so much for joining us. This is not your first time on our podcast.
Nope. Honored to be back.
So we appreciate you coming back. And, Joe, talk to us for just a couple of minutes. You've had a nice long career in the workers' compensation industry. As you look back on it, do you feel like this is still a good career path for folks that are thinking about coming into this industry or kicking the tires?
The workers' comp industry is definitely very mature, and it's got all the sort of hallmarks of a very mature business. It's a lot of consolidation, a lot of big companies, but there is some innovation going on in some smaller organizations sort of coming up from below, which is great. I think it's an industry that's actually primed for disruption because it's gotten kind of stodgy and old, and there are no problems in workers' comp these days. So people aren't innovating. They're terrified of the word innovation because that implies risk, which implies I might not get my bonus this year. So I think for folks who are willing to take a risk, the great thing about the workers' comp business is it's relatively small. There's not a lot of competition, not a lot of brilliant people getting into this space. So if you're looking for something where there is opportunity, I think it's a good spot. The other thing is, given all the job creation that's happened from the Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS Act and things like that, I think there's going to be an uptick in claim frequency and claim severity, which I'm not sure people are ready for.
Oh, I'm really loving this conversation already. This is fantastic.
All right. So, Joe, thanks for joining us. The last episode, we had our friend Alex Swedlow on, and we had a short history lesson on workers' compensation, and that was really fun. Wasn't it, Ralph?
It was. It was so well done, really interesting. I mean, it took us through, right? We really appreciate that comp just didn't fall out of the sky. It has been a process with a lot of ups and downs and twists and turns, and Alex did a great job of giving us that. Yeah.
And if I have to follow Alex, your audience is going to be severely disappointed.
Oh, no, they won't. That is not true.
No way. Yeah.
So having said that, Joe, real quick, tell our audience what it is that you are doing in the workers' comp space. So you're very well known. You're a nationally renowned speaker. You have a blog.
So what am I doing? Right now, I'm trying to get payers to understand the value-based care process system, how that's working and what the opportunity is. Workers' comp is one of the few industries that hasn't really embraced value-based care, bundled surgery, things like that. So I'm doing a really fun project with the Paradigm folks on that. Auditing some TPA's workers' compensation managed care programs. Suffice it to say, some are good, most are not. So that's been kind of entertaining. It's also interesting, we all think that this sort of percentage of savings thing is sort of beginning to go away. It's not, it's still persistent. So those are just a couple of fun things I'm involved in now.
And so folks can find you at Managed Care Matters and Health Strategy Associates. Is that right?
Yep. I've switched the blog from WordPress over to Substack. So it's joepaduda.substack.com. And thanks everybody for following me over. I got about 2,800 subscribers. So happy with people tolerating me 5 days a week.
That's awesome. We'll be sure and drop that into the show notes. So thank you. So, okay, like I said, Alex was here last time and we had a little history lesson on what is our workers' where our workers' compensation came from and how far back it goes. So today we're going to get into what is workers' compensation is about. So I'm going to take a pass at saying what it is. You guys correct me if I get anything wrong. But simply put, the workers' compensation system protects employees who are injured at work or become ill as a direct result of the work they do for their employer. If they do become injured or ill as a result of their work, the employer is expected to provide cash benefits and or medical care to these injured workers. We commonly refer to the work comp system as a no-fault system or no-fault insurance. So what this means is that the system is based on the principle that if injured workers are entitled to receive compensation for their injuries without proving fault against their employer, that means they cannot sue their employer. So when the injured worker accepts cash benefits or medical care from their employer, they give up their right to sue their employers, thereby limiting the employer's liability. Did I get anything out of whack?
No, that's a very fulsome definition.
Awesome. So that sounds simple enough, Joe, right? People get hurt at work. The employer takes care of taking care of their monetary loss and or medical expenses.
Right.
Why does it get so complicated? Why is our system so complicated?
Why does the system need people like your co-host here? Because sometimes things aren't exactly clear. Sometimes there's gray area. Sometimes there are differences of opinion. Sometimes there are bad actors in the industry. And sometimes there's complications. So, for example, a person could get hurt on a piece of machinery that was defective, and there's a third party involved, and that can get litigious. There can be an argument over whether the person really was injured at work, or the injury at work was complicated by some other factor, et cetera. And then you put on top of that, there's 51 different jurisdictions, 50 states, District of Columbia, plus the outlying islands, et cetera, that all have different workers' comp systems. So, for example, in Connecticut, very good reimbursement for workers' compensation. In Massachusetts, horrible reimbursement for medical care and workers' comp. In Florida, you can direct for the life of the claim. In New York, it's technically illegal to suggest an employer suggest a particular provider. So there's a lot of differences among and between all the different systems. I think that gets pretty complicated. Then there's interpretation differences as well.
Okay, so we've got for every state and District of Columbia, there is a different set of rules that govern how these benefits are delivered.
Yep.
And why is that? Why do the benefits differ so much state to state or system to system?
Because different states look at things differently. There are states that set your weekly reimbursement for lost wages at 60%. Some are at 66. Some are even higher. Some count those for the last X weeks or months, or does it include overtime or does it not, et cetera. So states just do things differently, and some states think theirs is a better system for whatever reason. It would certainly be a lot better. I think a lot more universal if it was across 51 states, but there's no chance of that ever happening. This is going to remain a state-specific benefit.
Ralph, you ready to interject anything here?
Joe, so you don't think that it's ever going to be possible to talk about a workers' comp system that looks at, I don't know, the 10, 15, 20 major components of it in the same light? You think it's always going to be separate by state level?
I do, for several reasons. One, Ralph, is that workers' compensation is a tiny little industry. Total medical spends about $31 billion. Total work comp premiums and equivalents somewhere around $80 to $90 billion. That's nothing. You're in an economy that's $5 trillion. It just doesn't amount to anything. The second is nobody in Congress wants to deal with it. So back when Clinton was in power and they were trying to get some sort of national healthcare program put together, they actually asked if workers' compensation could be added to it, and that was thrown out immediately because nobody wanted to deal with it at the federal level. Now, that was a long time ago. When the Affordable Care Act signed into law and then went into effect in 2014, there was no mention of anything related to occupational medicine, et cetera. So there's no compelling reason to federalize it. from the lobbyist perspective, and big money in Washington drives everything that happens in Washington, corporate money particularly. They don't want that system to become federalized. So until and unless, hopefully one day it is, corporate money is removed from politics, it isn't going to change. And then most states do a pretty good job of handling workers' compensation. The vast majority of claims are handled efficiently, relatively effectively. Just like any system, there are problems with it, as you two know as well as anybody. But there isn't anything dramatic where there's a particular crisis.
What you always hear, at least as a rationale for federalizing, nationalizing some standards of the workers' comp system, is the disparity between, what an injury to a worker may be in Mississippi versus California versus New York versus Florida. What do you think about that?
Again, what I think about that is there should be a federal standard which would make life a lot easier for everybody and safer for workers, and having national OSHA requirements, et cetera. But, what I want is not what's actually going to happen. And what's actually going to happen is, there's no political will to federalize the workers' comp system. We have a lot bigger problems in this country and in this world than workers' compensation. So if somebody's spending time on a federal level trying to deal with workers' compensation, I would say that they need to get their priorities straight, because workers' comp is not nearly as big a problem as a number of other issues that we're all dealing with these days.
That's so important, Joe. It really is, right? It puts it in perspective, because you're right. There's a lot bigger headaches and issues out there. Comp, for the most part, seems to be flowing nicely. It's been, like you said, well handled for the most part, and funded appropriately, again, for the most part. So nothing to be concerned about, nothing to write home about that there's an emergency going on.
None that I see. The only thing I see coming up is a possible uptick in frequency, uptick in severity. Now, with the new administration in place, there could be dramatic cutbacks in Medicaid. There could be privatization of all Medicare. If that happens, you're going to be looking for a lot of cost shifting to workers' compensation, because reimbursement to facilities are going to go way down. Now, why would that happen? Well, in order to justify a $1 trillion tax cut, which the Trump administration is looking towards, they're going to have to cut a lot of spending someplace else. The only places they can cut that spending is in Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. They've said they're not going to touch Social Security, believe it if you want. So the next thing is Medicaid. Medicaid people don't vote like a lot of other people do, so that's probably going to get hit. If that hits, Medicaid and Medicare account for 50, 55, 60%, depending on of medical spend in this country. And a lot of hospitals are kept alive by Medicare and Medicaid. So if they lose that funding or their margins go down, the cost shifting is going to ramp up dramatically.
Okay, I'm going to bring us back to level set. One of the reasons we wanted to record this series this year this way, Joe, is because we wanted to provide small bite-sized chunks of information to folks that are new to the industry, that don't necessarily understand the complications that we just kind of talked about. So let's go back to, we've got all these different state systems that vary a good deal in terms of how they interpret the benefits and deliver the benefits. So let's start with square one. I mean, the number one issue the first thing that happens when somebody is injured at work is compensability is determined. So that means that they decide whether or not, somebody was actually injured as a course or through the course and scope of doing their job. Who does that?
Arising out of or in the course of employment. So number one, did the employer have a workers' compensation insurance policy? Okay. Mm-hmm. Number two, was the injured worker an employee covered under the policy? Mm-hmm. Number three, did it arise in the course of, during or in the course of employment? In other words, if they went to lunch and stubbed their toe, that doesn't count in most places. If they were delivering a stack of magazines, then that would have been compensable. So who determines that is a claim adjuster. Mm-hmm. Most of these things are cut and dried. It's just, okay, this person fell off a ladder at at work. And then after that compensability's been determined, a claim number is typically assigned, the claim is input, data is taken, contacts occur, et cetera.
And then the process starts. And as you mentioned before, there's several different parties that are involved. We'll get into that in another episode, but there's several different parties involved,
Right.
stakeholders, we call them in the system, that have a particular interest in determining the outcome and the benefits that are then delivered. So I kind of want to go back to, you started to touch on a few different state nuances, but I kind of want to settle on 3 or 4 if we have the time. So where would you like to start? I think I suggested that we talk about California, Texas, and Florida. I definitely want to talk about a monopolistic state, but pick one and walk us through sort of the general nuances of how that state stands out with their system.
Let's start with monopolistic because that's the easiest. Washington, Ohio, North Dakota, and Wyoming, the state is the only entity you can buy your workers' comp insurance from. You can be self-insured if you're a big company, as long as you comply with the laws of the state, but you're buying your workers' comp from one of those 4 states. So we'll set that aside. So California, because of its size, also has all different types of businesses. So it's got public entity business, which is a lot of TPA work. It has a lot of very large private employers, other municipalities, et cetera, other governmental entities. A lot of third-party administrators are there. And of course, that workers' comp insurance, regular insurance is there. So California is a super important state, and people sort of look to it as a bellwether. The California work comp system is actually in pretty good shape right now. A number of years ago, it was in really bad shape. It was a long time ago, like 20 years. But some legislation was passed that actually fixed a lot of that. More recently, they passed legislation to change the fee schedule to be based on Medicare, which got rid of a lot of the complications within that. And they've also got formularies for drugs, and they've got clinical guidelines promulgated by the American College of Occupational Environmental Medicine, which very sound, very, very clinically robust. So they've got a pretty good system. Is it perfect? No. The bad news is any system involving humans is not going to be perfect. So because humans are involved, the system is imperfect. There are people that accuse the system of being unfair, et cetera, but that's just primarily friction. The vast majority of claims are handled expeditiously and appropriately, and the folks that I've dealt with in the state of California, as well as every other state, really in the insurance business and the claim payment business, really want to do the right thing by the injured worker.
Right, and you may have touched on this, but it's noteworthy to say that California is the largest state in terms of claims and all that's going on. So there's that.
It's just under 1/5 of total work comp exposure in the country. So California also has networks through the MPN, so you can direct an injured worker to a network for a defined period of time. That sort of employer direction has gotten more popular over the last, up until about 5 years ago. Nothing's really happened in work comp for the last 5 or 7 years. But California did that a number of years ago, which has gone a long way towards improving it. Now, a couple of problems in California. One, the Los Angeles Basin area is really bad from a litigation perspective. When you look at where legal costs are the highest, you can look at the LA Basin. And I won't hazard a guess as to why that's true. Mr. Swedlow is way more expert than I am at that. Having read a number of his team's wonderful reports, it certainly appears that there is a relatively small cohort of practicing physicians and practicing attorneys, not named Rafael Gonzalez, who are not good actors. And as a matter of fact, when you look at carpal tunnel, for example, the carpal tunnel incidence in the LA Basin is like off the charts. Nowhere else in California is there any meaningful carpal tunnel. Gosh knows what's happening in the LA Basin. There must be some virus that's contributing to carpal tunnel, some sort of attorney type bias.
Well, there's a pretty long history of some bad actors in general in that area, focused in that area.
There is, but just making the point there that every state has its own anomalies, and even within states there are anomalies. So if you're like a big insurance company and want to go into California, you better know about the LA Basin.
Right. Okay, so we talked about monopolistic states. We talked about California. How about Texas? We have this thing called opt-out in Texas. What the heck does that mean?
Well, it's actually opt-out's a bit of a misnomer because it's sort of an opt-in. So in Texas, employers don't have to have workers' comp insurance. But then, as you described earlier, Yvonne, what happens is then they're open to the court system and they can get sued. About a third of the employees, 25 to 35%, are not covered under the workers' compensation system. So they're through this opt-out system. And a lot of employers, the larger employers that are involved in this, have bought insurance to cover that. It's called employer liability. There's several different variations of it, which actually, in most cases, works fairly well. The work comp system in Texas also works fairly well. The largest player there is Texas Mutual. Very well run, very robust organization. It's done a very nice job on the managed care side. They've done some good things on the clinical side as well, and that's why they've grown and been successful.
And in my experience, I think the Texas Department of Workers' Comp does a really good job of educating their providers, much more so than some other states.
Yeah, my only complaint about Texas is they produce these reports that, when you read the reports, some of them just don't make sense because they'll compare one network against another network, and they'll say this network is better than that network, but it's the same network. It's just a different insurance company using that network. So nothing's perfect, but we could do a little better job with that.
All right. Well, what other states should we look at? What would you think is noteworthy? What about Florida? What's noteworthy about Florida?
Florida is a 100% employer direction state, so employers have the right to direct injured workers. It's also a small business state, so it has a higher percentage of work comp exposure is insured than in most other jurisdictions. It's also got really crappy reimbursement for physicians, quite frankly, and really overly generous reimbursement for hospitals. Facility costs in Florida are off the charts, stupid, ridiculous high. Part of that is because the state did not expand Medicaid. So especially the for-profit systems like HCA have really taken advantage of workers' comp. And if you look at their facility costs relative to others, their costs are off the chart. So we've done a lot of work, my consulting firm in Florida, looking at facility costs, quality, et cetera. And there are hospitals within 3 or 4 miles of each other. One costs 15 times more than the other, 15 times for a workers' compensation. Florida's also got, it can tend to be a little bit litigious, but they cleaned up a lot of that a number of years ago. So it's gotten better. Florida also has, they've had a number of carriers sort of come and go. Folks jumped into the business, didn't really understand workers' comp, healthcare being one of them. Finally figured out that they weren't making any money, even though they thought they were, and then got out of it. Florida seems to be afflicted with that a little bit more than other states. Nothing recently, thank goodness.
Goodness. Ralph, any other questions before we start to wrap it up?
Joe, you indicated earlier that you'd expected more claims to be forthcoming, that we're going to see more claims than we have seen in the comp system. I wanted to hear your thoughts, what states all throughout the country, and what's the reasoning behind that?
Sure. Great question. So claims frequency has been declining about 3.7% a year for the last 30 plus years. Yeah. And people make claims as to why that's happening. Nobody really knows. It's probably safety. It's also the fact that we don't make anything really big here. We don't build ships. We don't build railroad cars, with some few exceptions. We don't do a lot of really heavy construction. And Lord knows the infrastructure in this country was in really bad shape for a long period of time. So the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the Science Act, et cetera, pumped in well over $1 trillion in infrastructure. As you were driving around last summer and fall, you were probably doing what I was, which was complaining about traffic stops because all this construction was going on. Well, it was all going on because the bridges were falling apart and the roads were potholed and they weren't adequate. So all that stuff was happening. But there's also huge chip plants being built in Arizona, in Idaho, in Syracuse, New York, my alma mater. And those chip plants are going to employ thousands and thousands of people, and they're going to employ 50,000 people in Syracuse alone just to build the darn thing. Plus, you have to build a 12-foot diameter pipe from Lake Ontario all the way to Syracuse to bring water in and water back so you can cool the chip plant. So there's all these jobs are being created because of the Biden administration's CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, et cetera. So when you have construction, road construction, bridge construction, ports, terminals, solar, et cetera, you're hiring an awful lot of workers, fairly new. Your chances of getting an injury are highest in your first year of employment. It's also hard to send somebody back to work in a transitional duty job if they get hurt on a construction project on a highway. I mean, they can wave the flag, but the people waving the flag may already be in some sort of transitional duty thing. So I think that's going to spike up the severity, which is for clinical severity. There's going to have more severe claims because they're doing more dangerous things. And also the financial severity. It's going to cost more. And then they're going to be well-paid people, which will increase the indemnity. So I think there's going to be a bump up in claims. I think there already has been, but Lord knows the data in workers' comp takes so long to get here. We're not going to know for another year or so. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Yep. The other thing, Joe, that I found really interesting is your comment about the value-based challenge that we have in comp, where in other areas of insurance that has been welcomed and it's being used widely. We have been challenged here in comp. What is that for those that are new to the practice here? And then what exactly is the problem for us?
So value-based care broadly defined is not just fee for service. Like you get an x-ray and you pay $57.32. Value-based care is, okay, there's this surgery and we're going to bundle all the work associated with that surgery, from the date of surgery, the anesthesia, the surgeon, the clinical, all of the meds, the recovery, the physical therapy, and we're going to do that for one flat price. That's relatively common. It's been going on in the real world, Medicare, Medicaid, group health, et cetera, for a couple of decades. What's happening in comp is when you think about how TPAs and some insurance companies make their money, they make it on all of those individual services. So when you bundle that care and put all those things together, you're not getting a bill for PT. You're not getting a bill for drugs. You're not getting a bill for anesthesia. You're not getting a bill for hospital. You're not getting a bill for the surgeon. You're not getting a bill for the assistant surgeon. You're not getting a bill for all the stuff that happens after that. When you get those bills, A, you get a bill review processing fee. B, you get a network fee. C, you get some sort of nurse review fee. So all those fees are where TPAs are making their money. TPAs are not fans of value-based care because it diminishes their financial income. Now, is it the right thing for TPAs to do? Yes. Should they figure out some way to make that work so that they get paid what they should be paid for administering a claim? Yes. Should they base what they get paid on the more services that are delivered at a higher price, the more money they make? Absolutely not. But I've been yelling about this for 15 years and had zero effect. So one can only hope. The idea behind value-based care essentially is you put all that stuff together. The physician is then responsible for all of that because they get a bundled fee. If they don't do the right surgery and the patient has to be readmitted, the doc's paying for the surgery. If the PT doesn't go as it should, the PT's going to have to do that and not get paid. Anesthesia, same thing. So it essentially transfers the responsibility right back to the providers and say, you get this done, you get it done right. And the good thing about value-based care in a bundled surgery type of program is it ends up costing 10 to 12% less because they take a lot of that risk out of it overall.
I was going to go there. Do the numbers make sense? And you just answered that. I appreciate that. Thanks.
So yeah, I've been on the board of a Medicaid Medicare plan for 7 years. I recently left it. Everything we do is the company does is value-based care because we don't want to be following along behind doctors doing UR, asking them why they use 3 Band-Aids when 2 would have done. We say, you're good at this. Here's what we're going to pay you. You figure it out. Takes away a lot of the administrative nonsense. Administrative expenses for us were about 7 to 8%. Administrative expenses in comp are typically 20%.
Yeah. Yeah. There's your 10 to 12% savings, right? Yep.
There you go.
Okay, I wanted to hit the pause button for a second and visit a few terms that we threw out there while you were talking, Joe. So frequency is pretty easy to understand. That's how often or how frequently an injury occurs or workers' comp claims occur.
Technically, it is defined as the percentage of full-time employees who get an injury during a year. So it's typically in the single digit percentage, like 4.5% would be your frequency.
Okay. And then severity, you described it, but it was kind of a quick description. Severity is?
Sorry. So severity in workers' comp in no other industry under the sun is financial severity, is how much it costs, which makes 0 sense. Severity should be clinical, which is that there are different levels of severity of an injury. You can have a sprained back or you could have a broken back. That's a severity issue. Unfortunately, in workers' comp, everything is numbers. It's not healthcare oriented, so we get stuck with that. So that's how severity is used in the work comp system. Cost.
Awesome. And the last one is indemnity. Explain what indemnity is to our listeners.
Indemnity, so medical is all the medical care that the patient gets. Indemnity is, as Rafe described it earlier, it's the dollars that they get to replace their lost wages, and or the dollars they might get in a settlement. If they settle a claim, close a claim, they're going to get a bundled thing, and it could be counted as indemnity, medical, or both. Or it could be, in some states, you get an additional payment. You have some sort of disabling injury or amputation or something like that, you get an additional payment. All that is indemnity. And then medical, indemnity, and then administrative expense, allocated and unallocated, which is just what it costs to manage the claim and run the insurance company.
Thank you for explaining that for us.
You're most welcome.
Let's see, there was another question that just escaped my mind. I think we covered it all. Ralph, what do you think?
I think we have. I think that it's so hard, Joe, to talk about comp in a 30-minute conversation because it's layered with so many different components. But man, you make it easy on us to truly understand it and grab it and really feel like you own it. So I'm always grateful and appreciative. You do that so well.
Well, I'm really grateful and appreciative for the work you folks do. One good thing about working with folks like you is you understand this, but you also understand that people new to the business, indemnity, medical, clinical, frequency, what is all this nonsense? So I appreciate you boiling it down for them.
So Joe, thank you so much. Okay, Ralph's laughing now. Thanks so much for joining us and helping us break down this complicated system so that folks that are new to the system may understand it a little better.
You're welcome. You can't spell complicated without comp.
That's true.
I love that. I'm going to have to use that.
It's all yours.
Okay, Joe, so I have a question for you. What is it that you really like about the workers' compensation system?
Outside of hanging around with folks like you two, I would say there's a couple things. One is the work comp industry was the first big payer that really figured out the opioid crisis because our hair was on fire because a lot of our claimants were getting opioids and shouldn't have. So we jumped on that really quickly and figured out this is causing a problem. It's keeping people away from work. It's killing people. This was first figured out in the state of Washington, and they just did wonderful work determining that and then coming back and saying, hey, we're actually killing workers. So kudos to the industry for accepting that responsibility and really minimizing the inappropriate use of opioids. Saved hundreds and hundreds of lives. The second thing is no other healthcare system in this country cares about functionality. And at the end of the day, healthcare should be about functionality. I'm 66. I have 2 grandkids. I want to be able to go walk my grandson around. I want to be able to pick him up. I want to be able to take him to the grocery store. I want to be able to play soccer with my granddaughter. People want to be able to walk to the corner store. People want to be able to do what they do their job. Nobody in Medicare cares about that. After having been in a Medicare Medicaid duals plan, constantly talking about outcomes, I kept asking, but what can people actually do? Oh, what matters is if their blood sugar levels are X. No, I don't give a rat's rear end about my blood sugar level. I want to know, can I go to the corner grocery store and bring back a bag of groceries? Can I walk up a set of stairs? Can I go to the bathroom by myself? Workers' comp cares about that a lot. And I think that that's something that the rest of the world needs to get its collective mind around, because that's what healthcare should be, which is like, how do we get these people back to full functionality as quickly as we possibly can and keep them there? So work comp has its own issues, but the thing that I think I like the most about it is it cares about what's important. It cares about what is most important to people, which is their ability to do what they want to do.
So what you're talking about is the humanity. Ralph and I often reference the humanity that is present in our system. So thanks for clarifying that. There's one other thing I want to ask you. You touched on it a couple minutes ago. So why is it though that, so, you say that in one sentence, but then there's another time that you mentioned that it's the only element of our healthcare system in this country that is so focused on the financial outcomes?
Well, I would say every sort of the financial outcome for the patient, every health system is interested in the financial outcome, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. This is from a financial outcome, the claim goes on forever or until it is closed. That doesn't happen in any other type of insurance. So the ultimate outcome, did the person get back to work? Did they get back to functionality, or are they permanently disabled so they needed care? Workers' comp claims can be, there are claims up to $35 million for taking care of people. So the problem in comp is you have very limited ways to control that. So you have to make sure that you deliver the best possible care as early as you can, which usually means the right type of care is actually provided. But they do that because they're concerned about that long-term financial outcome. Did I answer your question?
You did. Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, Ralph, your last chance. Any other questions?
Joe, I just want to say thanks so much, man, for your leadership, what you continue to put out for the industry. You and I have coffee every single morning together. You don't know it, but you and I are personal, close friends. I read it sometimes more than a couple of occasions. Sometimes I scream it out loud to my wife, who's like, "What are you talking about? Joe said."
I do the same thing. Kuko is very familiar with Joe's blog and a lot of things that he says.
Joe,
well,
thank you, man. Thank you.
I'm trying to be a happy warrior these days, but as we all know,
I know. It is tough.
It is tough. All right. Well, thanks, guys. I'm going to go breastfeed.
Have a great, thank you so much for tolerating the questions. I know that you are working on minimizing your working time and spending more time with the grandkids. So thank you so much for spending time with us today. We really do appreciate it.
And Oakley says thanks too.
Oh, hi, Oakley.
Look. He's the best.
Love
the
it,
best.
love it.
All right, kids. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Hasta luego.
Hasta luego.
Bye-bye.